You know that feeling, maybe just for a second, where you sense yourself somewhere else?
Yeah,
Like you're observing your own body. It's a really curious sensation, isn't it?
it absolutely is.
This phenomenon, what people call an out-of-body experience, or OBE, well, comes up everywhere. Casual chats, serious academic work.
Mm.
Whether you've just bumped into the idea or you're really looking for a deeper dive, it touches on consciousness, self-perception, some big ideas.
Indeed, and that's exactly what we're aiming for in this deep dive. We want to get beyond the anecdotes and really explore the established scientific understanding of OBEs.
Okay.
We'll be using a pretty comprehensive academic review as our guide. It's called OBE2, Established Concepts on the Nature of Out-of-Body Experiences and Their Outcomes.
Right, so like a roadmap through the research.
Exactly, think of it that way. We'll hit the key findings, the ongoing debates, basically the current landscape within the scientific community.
Okay, so what are the main stops on this roadmap? What can we expect to cover?
Well, first, we really need to nail down what researchers mean by an OBE. It's more nuanced than just feeling a bit detached, as we'll see.
Right.
Then we'll look at the kinds of situations, the circumstances that seem to be linked with OBEs. After that, we'll dig into the main theories, trying to explain them both psychological and neurological. Strengths, weaknesses, the whole picture.
And the impact they have.
Yes. Finally, we'll touch on the psychological outcomes for people who experience them. The goal here is really to give you a thorough but, accessible overview. Cut through some of the complexity, maybe some misinformation too.
Sounds like a fascinating journey. Let's start with that definition then. What is an OBE in the eyes of academic research? It's clearly not just like zoning out for a moment.
You're right to make that distinction. The dominant view in research, backed by decades of work, really sees OBEs as a form of dissociative experience.
Associative.
And dissociation in this context basically means a disruption in how things like consciousness, memory, identity, or perception normally integrate. For OBEs, it specifically shows up as this subjective feeling of detachment from your physical body. That ordinary sense of being in your body gets disrupted.
So what's the evidence backing that up? How do researchers arrive at that dissociative understanding?
Well, there's quite a bit. One strong line is from studies consistently finding a link between people who report OBEs and people who score high on dissociation scales. These scales measure that tendency towards feeling detached from your body or your surroundings.
Okay, so a correlation there.
A strong one, yes. And furthermore, OBEs are often reported by people with depersonalization disorder. That's a recognized condition where you have persistent feelings of detachment from your own thoughts or body.
Ah, right.
The overlap there suggests, some shared underlying mechanism.
That makes sense. It's like the mind's connection to the physical self gets temporarily scrambled, maybe.
That's a good way to put it. And this idea is also supported by something called psychological absorption.
Absorption.
Yeah, it's basically how easily someone can get completely engrossed in their own internal world, mental imagery, fantasy, that sort of thing. Research keeps showing that people who report OBEs tend to be high in absorption.
So a tendency towards internal focus might make these experiences more likely.
It seems to play a role, yeah. It might make someone more predisposed to these internally focused states where dissociation can happen more easily.
You also mentioned parallels with drug-induced states earlier. How does that connect to the dissociation idea?
Right, that's a really compelling angle. There have been studies looking at the language people use, semantic analysis, comparing descriptions.
Comparing what exactly?
Comparing narratives from people who've used dissociative drugs, especially ketamine, with accounts of near-death experiences, or NDEs. And the similarities are striking.
And NDEs often involve OBEs.
Almost always, yes. That's a key feature. And ketamine, well, it works by blocking NMDA receptors in the brain. This famously distorts perception and creates this profound sense of detachment from the world, from your own body.
Ah, I see.
So these drug parallels add weight to the idea that OBEs involve these altered dissociative states of consciousness.
So this feeling of being out of body is almost like a hallmark of near-death experiences.
It really is, largely. The details vary, of course, but that core sensation of being separate from the physical body is remarkably consistent in NDE accounts.
Suggesting maybe similar mechanisms are at play in those extreme situations.
That's the thinking, yes. Whatever is happening physiologically or psychologically during an NDE seems very conducive to triggering that OBE component.
Okay. Now, you mentioned psychological categories like autoscopic phenomena. Can you unpack that a bit? How does that fit in?
Sure, autoscopic phenomena, or AP, is a broader term. It covers experiences where someone has this illusion of seeing a second version of their own body out there in space.
Like seeing a double.
Exactly. And initially, some researchers thought, well, maybe OBEs are just a specific type of autoscopic hallucination. Like you see this double, and you mistakenly think that's you, viewed from afar.
But that idea didn't quite stick.
No, it hasn't really held up against the
Why
evidence.
not? Don't people see a double during OBEs sometimes?
Sometimes, yes, seeing a second body can be part of it, but it's definitely not universal. And it's crucial to distinguish different types of AP.
Okay.
There's autoscopic hallucination, AH. That's usually seeing an image of yourself from your normal perspective, still feeling embodied, just seeing this extra image. Then there's heautoscopy, HAS, which is similar, but you might feel like you're experiencing things from that double's perspective, though the sense of embodiment can be kind of ambiguous.
So how is a classic OBE different then?
The key difference in a classic OBE is that profound, convincing feeling that your consciousness, your awareness, is actually located outside your physical body. You often feel you can look back at your body and see the world from that outside spot.
Got it. So it's that subjective sense of consciousness being elsewhere that's the defining feature.
Precisely. And that's why trying to lump all OBEs under the AP umbrella is now seen as inadequate. Many people reporting OBEs don't describe seeing a second body. Plus, a very common feature of OBEs is feeling like you travel to distant places without your physical body. That travel aspect isn't typical of other autoscopic phenomena.
Okay, that clarifies things. So based on all this research, what are the core features, the generally agreed upon characteristics that define an OBE in psychology? What do researchers really look for?
All right. Pulling together decades of work, several things stand out. First, and most critical, is that sensation of consciousness separating from the physical body disembodiment.
Right, the outness.
Exactly. Second, sensations of floating are very common. Third, seeing your own physical body from an external viewpoint, looking back at yourself. Fourth, that subjective sense of traveling to other places without your body moving. Fifth, sometimes a feeling of having a non-physical body or a different kind of self. Sixth, the vividness people often say it felt as real as waking life.
Wow.
And finally, seventh, a really strong conviction afterwards that it wasn't just a dream or a hallucination, that it was somehow real.
That's quite a list. It paints a picture of something far more complex than just feeling a bit detached. What about terms like astral projection? We hear that sometimes more in like esoteric circles. How does that fit in?
Right. Astral projection comes more from esoteric occult traditions. You find it in spiritual texts describing mystical experiences.
Not scientific sources then.
No, but it's part of the historical and cultural backdrop. In those contexts, it often refers to the idea that a subtle body, maybe an astral body, can consciously leave the physical one and travel elsewhere, maybe even to other dimensions or planes.
So is there any overlap between that idea and the psychological view of OBEs?
The core connection really is that fundamental concept. Consciousness, or some part of the self, separating from the physical body.
Ah,
That idea of a split between awareness and the physical form is central in both, even if the explanations are totally different. It's that feeling of being out, of awareness existing somewhere else in space that links them.
that brings us neatly to dreams. It seems like the line between a really vivid dream and what someone might call an OBE could get blurry. How do researchers tell them apart?
That's a really sharp question. And yes, research shows people do sometimes interpret vivid dreams as OBEs. There are definite similarities, especially with lucid dreams where you know you're dreaming.
Like what similarities?
Well, in both, there can be a sort of suspension of critical thinking, accepting weird things as normal within the experience. Even the way the environment seems distorted or simplified can be similar in dreams and reported OBEs. It suggests the brain states underlying dreaming might overlap with or contribute to OBEs.
Okay, so if the subjective feel can be so similar, how do researchers draw that line? Is there a defining difference?
The author of our review suggests the crucial point is the subjective experience while it's happening. If, during the dream, the person has a clear, compelling sense of their consciousness being separate from their physical body, then that qualifies as an OBE by this definition.
But if that feeling isn't there,
If that core sense of separation is missing during the dream, even if it's super vivid or involves weird perspectives, then it's fundamentally a different kind of experience, just a vivid dream.
that makes sense. But what about looking back? Like someone has a weird dream and later decides, hey, maybe that was an OBE, even if they didn't feel separate at the time.
Right, for those retrospective interpretations where the feeling of separation wasn't there during the event, the author proposes a new term, consciousness relocation interpretations, or free eyes.
Life right.
These are experiences, maybe vivid dreams, maybe other altered states that get labeled as OBEs after the fact, but they lack that key disembodiment feeling while occurring. Making this distinction helps bring more clarity, more precision to studying these things.
Now, the review also mentions eccentric uses of the term OBE in some experiments. What's the issue there?
Yeah, this points to cases in, say, neurological research where scientists induced certain sensations or illusions and called them OBEs, even when people didn't report that fundamental feeling of consciousness leaving the body.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Some studies using electrical stimulation on the brain reported people feeling like their legs got shorter, or their upper body felt shifted relative to their lower body, and these were sometimes labeled OBEs.
That doesn't really sound like the classic description, does it?
Not really. And often in these studies, people reported these body distortions while their eyes were open, which isn't typical for spontaneous OBEs. Those usually happen eyes closed. Also, these induced feelings were often temporary, maybe disappearing if the person focused on that body part. Whereas in many reported OBEs, the visual sense of being outside, seeing the environment persists even if they look at themselves. And crucially, these induced effects often lack that feeling of the self moving independently or that strong sense of reality that characterizes many spontaneous OBEs.
What about other techniques like TMS or virtual reality? Did those studies induce real OBEs?
Well, some TMS studies stimulating the temporal lobes reported feelings of lightness or floating, but again, often without the core stuff, the separation, seeing the body from outside, traveling, and VR experiments. They've been really good at creating illusions of, say, body disownership, or feeling like yourself is located where the VR avatar is.
But not the same as a spontaneous OBE.
Generally not. These VR illusions typically lack that profound, convincing sense of disembodiment, the vividness, the feeling of full immersion that people often report with spontaneous OBEs.
So it sounds like the label OBE might have been stretched a bit thin in some research contexts.
That's exactly the point the review makes. The author argues that unless the person actually reports feeling at some point that their consciousness has separated from their body, we probably shouldn't call it a true OBE.
Why is that important?
Because using the term two broadly muddies the waters. It lumps different kinds of experiences together, which makes it harder to understand the core phenomenon itself.
So, pulling that definition section together, what's the main takeaway?
The author really hammers home that an OBE should primarily be seen as a dissociative experience. Its absolute core feature is that subjective sense of consciousness separating from the body.
Right, the disembodiment.
Exactly. Whether that comes with floating, seeing your body, traveling, those are common features, but secondary to the separation itself. And for OBE-like things that lack that separation, the author suggests using more specific terms, like visual relocation illusion, VRI, if you just feel you're in a different spot, or bodily dysmorphic illusion, BDI, for weird body shape feeling.
To avoid confusion.
Precisely. The key point is that fuzzy definitions in past research have probably lumped different things together, making it harder to draw solid conclusions across studies.
Okay, that really clarifies the definition side of things. Now let's shift gears. What actually triggers these OBEs? What are the common situations, the induction states, and what else tends to happen alongside them?
Right, the circumstances linked to OBEs, and yeah, let's use the single quotes as the review suggests. Acknowledging those definition issues are incredibly varied. They span physiological, psychological, even drug-related states.
Okay, let's start with physiological ones.
Physiologically, a big one is being on the verge of sleep or just waking up. You know, those drowsy states. Often it's linked with sleep paralysis too.
The hypnagogic and hypnopompic states.
Exactly. Those transition periods seem to create a brain environment where OBEs might be more likely. But it's not just sleep transitions.
What else?
Things like regaining awareness during general anesthesia, rapid unexpected changes in body position like in an accident or a fall, and states of extreme fear or panic have also been linked.
Wow, quite dramatic situations.
They can be. Also certain neurological conditions like migraines and epileptic seizures. And it's worth noting, OBEs in these contexts are usually reported with eyes closed. And of course, as we mentioned, experiences very much like OBEs are a major feature of near-death experiences, cardiac arrest, clinical death situations.
That's a huge range of physiological triggers. What about substances? Drugs?
Yes, quite a few psychoactive substances are reported to induce OBE-like states. We talked about dissociatives like ketamine, but also classic psychedelics, psilocybin, DMT, LSD, mescaline. Even cannabis and some opioids have shown up in reports. The sheer variety of these drugs suggests that different neurochemical pathways might be involved in triggering these kinds of experiences.
So a wide array of altered body states seem associated with OBEs. What about trying to induce them deliberately? Are there actual techniques people use?
Oh yes, definitely. People report using all sorts of techniques to try and have an OBE intentionally. A common goal is reaching a state sometimes called mind awake, body asleep.
Trying to stay conscious while the body falls asleep.
Exactly. Others try to deliberately hover in those sleep-wake transition states, hoping to trigger a spontaneous trance. Hypnotic induction is another one, especially for highly suggestible people, trying to prompt dissociation. Deep trance states, guided visualization, meditation practices are also common.
Visualization, like
Yeah.
picturing yourself floating out.
Precisely. Many techniques involve actively imagining your consciousness or some kind of subtle body separating and floating away. Other reported methods get more technical, like using binaural beats.
Binaural beat.
Yeah, those auditory illusions using different frequencies in each ear, aiming to influence brain waves towards altered states. Sensory deprivation, cutting off external input, is another. And interestingly, sometimes even sensory overload is mentioned, though less common. Oh, and exposure to strong G-forces, like pilots experience, has been anecdotally linked too, likely due to the physiological disorientation.
That's a wild mix of techniques, everything from quiet meditation to G-forces. It really suggests people are trying all sorts of ways to shift consciousness. Now, you mentioned links to psychological conditions earlier, beyond just general dissociation.
Yes, the specific dissociative disorders, depersonalization and derealization, are relevant here. They often occur together.
Can you quickly remind us what those are?
Sure. Depersonalization involves feeling detached from your own mind, body, or emotions, like you're watching yourself. Derealization is feeling detached from the outside world. Things seem unreal or distorted. And the core symptoms of these conditions really overlap with OBE-like feelings. It's not unusual for people with these disorders to report OBE sensations as part of their experience.
So if someone's already prone to feeling detached or unreal, maybe they're more likely to have an OBE.
That seems like a reasonable hypothesis, and research supports that link. Now, beyond these specific conditions and triggers, there's a whole constellation of other weird phenomena people report experiencing around their OBEs.
Oh, like what?
Large web surveys have been really useful here, painting a broader picture. For instance, a huge percentage report a sudden jolt or jerk awake. Auditory stuff is common too: buzzing, humming, roaring sounds. Sensations of floating, sinking, spinning, also very frequent. Feelings of intense vibrations or energy surges. Sleep paralysis, as we mentioned, comes up a lot. Flying in dreams is often reported nearby, feeling touched or lifted. Sometimes panic attacks. Hearing voices or footsteps when alone. An odd one. Feeling like you can see through closed eyelids. Lucid dreaming is very commonly linked. And less frequently, feeling like you've encountered non-physical beings or even communicated with deceased loved ones.
That's an incredible range. Auditory, visual, physical sensations, even potentially paranormal seeming stuff. It sounds like a whole package of unusual perceptual events can cluster around an OBE.
It really does seem that way. But what's striking is how little research there's been trying to connect the dots. Like, how does the specific way an OBE starts influence the actual content of the experience?
That does feel like a missing piece. Has any research tried to look at those connections
Yeah.
between the trigger and the experience itself?
A little bit, yes, but it's limited. One study, for example, found that people who felt mentally calm going into an OBE tended to have more positive experiences, more joy, peace. Their OBEs were also reported as more detailed, vivid, and impactful afterwards.
So your mindset at the time could really shape the whole thing.
That's what it suggests, yes. Other studies use these OBE feature indexes checklists of common characteristics. They found that OBEs happening in passive relaxed states or while lying down tended to tick more boxes on the list, having more typical features.
Interesting.
Also, OBEs that were deliberately induced scored higher on these indexes than spontaneous ones. Interestingly, knowing about OBEs beforehand didn't seem to make a difference in the number of features reported.
So even things like body posture might play a subtle role.
That's the implication. Seemingly small factors might interact with the bigger psychological and brain processes. And the author of our review makes a good point here, suggesting future research could make these feature indexes even better
How so?
by being more specific about the sensory aspects. Instead of just asking, did you perceive something far away? Ask, was it visual perception, auditory, tactile? Getting more detailed, more nuanced information about what exactly people experience.
To get a finer-grained picture.
Exactly. That level of detail could then let us properly investigate how specific features relate to different triggers, different personality traits, different outcomes. The author actually mentions developing an expanded index themselves, so work is ongoing to refine how we study this.
It really paints OBEs as complex events shaped by everything from our body state to our mindset. Okay, let's get to the core now. The theories. What are the main ideas trying to explain why these OBEs happen? Let's start with the psychological perspective.
Okay. Psychological theories have been trying to grapple with OBEs for a long time, way back to the 19th century. Early on, the dominant view was mostly that they were illusions, tricks of the mind.
But not everyone agreed.
Now, even back then, some thinkers were open to the idea that the mind, or something non-physical, might actually leave the body. They often pointed to anecdotes of apparent ESP extrasensory perception happening during OBEs as possible evidence.
So the OBE-ESP link is quite old.
Very old. The idea of telepathy during OBEs was also proposed. Maybe the person wasn't unconsciously picking up thoughts from someone else far away, and that info got woven into the OBE, creating the illusion of being there. But as psychology developed in the early 20th century, skepticism about literal mind-leaving grew. Some argued OBEs were just extremely vivid dreams, maybe shaped by subconscious ESP info.
And then came the psychodynamic interpretations later on, from psychoanalysis.
Right, mid-20th century. Those theories dove into potential deeper symbolic meanings. Some suggested OBEs were hallucinations related to fear of death, or maybe even replaying birth fantasies. Others saw them as representing personal acceptance or expressing universal archetypes from the collective unconscious.
Interesting ideas, but were they based on evidence?
Mostly speculative, really. They offered ways to interpret OBEs, but lacked solid empirical grounding.
Which brings us to attempts to get more concrete evidence, like Tart's famous experiment with Ms. Z. That sounds like a really key study.
It was, definitely. Tart's 1968 experiment was a major early effort to test the idea of consciousness leaving the body. He had this participant, Ms. Z, who reported having regular spontaneous OBEs during sleep.
What was the setup?
Tart put a random 5-digit number on a high shelf above her bed out of sight. He monitored her brain activity with EEG while she slept. Her task was, if she had an OBE, to float up, read the number, and report it when she woke up.
And what happened?
On the 4th night, she reported an OBE and correctly recalled the number. Statistically, the odds of guessing that were incredibly low.
Wow. That sounds like pretty strong evidence for something leaving the body.
But I feel like I remember hearing criticisms about that study.
Yes, you're right. Despite the striking result, there were significant methodological criticisms. A big one was the lack of continuous direct observation or video. Could she have somehow physically looked?
Yeah.
Tart argued EEG didn't show gross movement, but without video, you can't be certain. Also, could the number have been reflected somewhere, like on a clock face? Tart thought it unlikely, but it was raised as a possibility.
So even with the correct number, the limitations meant it wasn't definitive proof of externalization.
Exactly. Even assuming no cheating, critics argued the result could potentially be explained by ESP clairvoyance working without her actually leaving her body, because similar results happen in remote viewing studies where people don't claim an OBE.
So intriguing, but not conclusive.
Precisely. It sparked huge debate, but wasn't the smoking gun.
What about other early experiments trying to detect something non-physical during OBEs, like the one with Kitten or the optical device?
Right, those were creative attempts. The Keith Harary experiment involved him trying to project his consciousness to influence a kitten in another room. The kitten seemed less active during his reported projections.
Suggesting an influence.
Possibly, but critics said, well, maybe it's just telepathy or his intention affecting things generally, not necessarily him being there. Then there was the Osis and McCormick experiment with Dr. Alex Tanis. They used an optical device with hidden targets and a sensitive strain gauge.
What were the results there?
Mixed. Tanis got one target right, and the strain gauge registered a deflection. But again, methodological issues, baseline measurements, overall hit rate being possibly chance. And even if the strain gauge moved, was it psychokinesis, mind over matter, rather than a physical, like, OBE body?
So these early experimental attempts, while clever, seem to have struggled with methodology and interpretation.
Pretty much. They were provocative, but faced big hurdles. Improving consciousness was literally externalized, so research shifted focus.
Shifted how?
From the 80s on, psychological research looked less at proving OBEs were real externalizations and more at how they relate to other psychological stuff, states of consciousness, personality traits.
What did they find?
Lots of correlations. People reporting more OBEs also tended to score higher on psychological absorption, have certain body awareness patterns, report more depersonalization, derealization, have vivid dreams, be fantasy-prone, report other hallucinations or paranormal experiences, score higher on hypnotic suggestibility or schizotypy scales, and sometimes report past trauma.
So OBEs seem to cluster with a whole range of other unusual experiences and traits.
That's the picture that emerged. There were also some later studies, like Trisoldi's, looking at perception during hypnotically induced OBEs. They reported some positive results, suggesting people got information about remote targets.
But the same ESP issue applies there.
Exactly. It's hard to rule out clairvoyance or telepathy operating without actual externalization.
Okay. What about the near-death experience research? Given the strong link, did that provide stronger evidence for an out-of-body component where people actually perceive things correctly?
NDE research definitely added some compelling accounts. Studies like Van Lommel's reported cardiac arrest survivors giving detailed descriptions of events during their resuscitation, things they seemingly shouldn't have known, which were sometimes corroborated by medical staff.
Corroborated accounts sound significant.
They are intriguing. There were even attempts, like Parnia's AWARE study, to test this more rigorously by placing hidden targets in resuscitation rooms.
Did people see the targets during their NDEs?
Mostly no, the results were largely inconclusive on that front. Few people who had NDEs reported seeing the targets.
And the review points out potential flaws with that target approach itself, right?
Yes, exactly. It assumes someone having an OBE during cardiac arrest would even notice or care about some random target. It assumes their OBE vision works like normal vision, and that the OBE world perfectly matches the physical one. Those are big assumptions. Plus, you have these other intriguing NDE reports, people born blind describing visual experiences, or peak in Darien cases where people see deceased relatives whose death they didn't know about yet. Reviews like Holden's have gathered many corroborated accounts of perception during NDEs, but again, lack of controlled conditions makes scientific proof difficult.
So even with these compelling NDE stories, solid, controlled evidence for literal consciousness externalization during OBEs is still lacking.
That's the general consensus in mainstream science, yes. The author of our review takes the stance that it's currently more productive to develop neuropsychological theories grounded in what we can measure brain activity, psychological factors.
While leaving the door open for future possibilities.
Exactly. Acknowledging that future understanding of consciousness, maybe involving quantum ideas, might change things. But for now, let's focus on explanations within current science.
Okay, a pragmatic approach. So shifting back to the psychological theories within that framework, beyond the early ideas, what are the big three, the most prominent psychological theories trying to explain OBEs?
All right, the first major one is Palmer's theory from the late 70s, focusing on proprioceptive information, our sense of body position.
Okay.
Palmer suggested that if this bodily sensory input gets reduced or disrupted, our internal body concept changes. He then brought in some Freudian ideas, suggesting unconscious processes try to reintegrate this body concept, and sometimes this manifests as an OBE.
What were the criticisms of that?
Well, critics like Murray asked, why are some people more prone than others, even with similar sensory reduction? Palmer later added factors like sleep, stress, or settings involving death threat might lower the threshold, but Blackmore countered that many OBEs don't involve death threat, and Alvarado noted it's hard to empirically test unconscious threats anyway.
Okay, theory one. Disrupted body sense triggers reintegration attempt.
Here.
What's the second prominent theory?
Second is Blackmore's cognitive map theory from the mid-80s onwards. She focused more on disruptions in sensory input, generally visual, vestibular, balance, sense, etc.
How does that lead to an OBE?
Her idea is that when sensory input is unreliable, our brain relies more on internal models of reality built from memory, imagination, expectation. If this internal, often bird's-eye view model becomes more compelling than the messy, real-time sensory input, the brain might just adopt that as reality, leading to the feeling of being outside looking down.
A sort of reality model swap.
Kind of, yeah. It highlighted sensory disruption nicely, but her initial idea that OBEers might just have better mental imagery skills didn't get consistently supported by research. The results were mixed.
Got it. And the third major psychological theory.
That would be Irwin's theory, also starting in the 80s and developing over time. He also emphasized disruption of sensory info, both from the body's somatic and the outside world.
Similar to the others then.
No.
What's his specific mechanism?
Irwin suggested this disruption leads to a feeling of disembodied consciousness. Then, perhaps through a process like synesthesia, where senses get mixed up, this feeling gets translated into a visual image of oneself being outside. Later, he really emphasized psychological absorption, as key people high in absorption are better able to dissociate from body sensations and construct that out-of-body view.
And others built on that.
Yes, researchers like Murray built on Irwin, suggesting OBE-prone individuals might have a weaker sense of embodiment or greater dissociative tendencies to begin with. But, as Murray notes, it's a bit chicken and egg. Do these traits cause OBEs, or are they a result of having them?
It's striking how all three theories seem to circle back to sensory disruption being important.
That's a really key takeaway highlighted in the review. Whether it's proprioception, general sensory input, or somatic external info, some kind of breakdown or mismatch in sensory processing is central to all three.
But none of them fully explain everything.
Right. They struggle to fully account for the sheer diversity of triggers, why some people have OBEs in certain situations and others don't, or why it's episodic, happens one time but not the next in the same state. The review identifies these as three big tasks for any future, more complete theory.
So these psychological theories offer valuable pieces, but the puzzle isn't complete, especially regarding the why me, why now questions and the brain basis.
Precisely. They give us psychological mechanisms, potential traits, but lack the full picture, especially the underlying neurophysiology and explaining that individual and situational variability.
Which leads us right into the brain's role. What has neurological research uncovered about the neural correlates of OBE-type experiences? And how does this connect to the challenges the psychological theories face?
Neurological research has definitely started mapping this territory, often focusing on what's called bodily self-consciousness. That includes our sense of owning our body, feeling located inside it, and our perspective on the world from within it.
And they've found links to brain issues.
Yes, studies have linked OBEs to various brain conditions, both widespread diseases and specific focal problems. Things like epilepsy, migraines, brain injuries, vestibular disorders have all shown associations.
What about brain imaging, like fMRI? Has that pinpointed specific areas?
There's still not a huge amount of fMRI work specifically on OBEs. One interesting study looked at someone who could induce an OBE-type state voluntarily, mostly feeling movement, kinesthetic imagery.
And what did the fMRI show?
It showed distinct brain activity patterns during these states, different from just imagining movement. And notably, it included activation in areas like the temporoparietal junction, the TPJ, which has popped up in other studies of otoscopy and related phenomena. But as the review stresses, we need more fMRI studies.
The TPJ. That region seems to come up a lot in this context. Why is it considered so relevant?
Well, studies using TMS, that non-invasive brain stimulation, have linked disrupting the right TPJ to inducing OBE-type feelings. Direct electrical stimulation there during epilepsy surgery mapping has also sometimes triggered similar sensations.
Oh, okay.
Neuroimaging also shows TPJ activity when people mentally imagine seeing themselves from outside or during otoscopy. But, and this loops back to our definition discussion, the review cautions that some TPJ-induced experiences might be more like body image distortions or feeling spatially displaced, not necessarily full OBEs with consciousness separation.
So the TPJ might be involved, but it's not necessarily the single OBE spot in the brain.
That seems to be the consensus now. Other TMS studies targeting, say, the temporal lobes have also reported inducing altered self-perceptions labeled OBEs, but those findings have been harder to replicate and faced methodological critiques. Cerebellum stimulation reportedly caused a falling illusion called an OBE, but without the visual part.
So it sounds like the neurological picture is still pretty murky. No single brain region explains it all.
That's a good summary. There's no clear agreement on specific regions or even which brain hemisphere is dominant. And interestingly, suggestibility comes up again here. Some research suggests more suggestible people might be more likely to report an OBE in response to certain cues or stimulation.
What about our sense of balance? The vestibular system, has that been looked at neurologically?
Oh, yes. The vestibular system is crucial for balance, spatial orientation, sensing movement. Research there offers some interesting angles on OBE sensations like floating, elevation, flying.
How so?
One influential model suggests these feelings might arise from a mismatch, a conflict between what your vestibular system and body sensors are telling you about your actual position, and maybe an internal assumption that you should be upright. When there's a conflict, especially if other senses like vision are reduced, the brain might generate an illusory perception of where you are like floating.
A sort of brain best guess gone weird?
Kinda.
No.
Similarly, disruptions in the otoliths, parts of the inner ear sensitive to gravity, have been proposed to explain that common 180-degree rotation feeling some report, turning to look back at the body. But again, these vestibular models don't explain all OBE features or OBEs happening without obvious sensory disruption.
And as you mentioned earlier, neurological findings don't fully explain why, say, during seizures, some people have OBEs and others with similar brain activity don't.
Exactly. That really points away from a single OBE center and towards something more complex. It suggests OBEs likely arise from disruptions across multiple brain areas, affecting large-scale networks.
Like a network glitch rather than a single spot failing.
That fits the evidence better. It aligns with neurobiological theories of NDEs, too, which often link phenomena like OBEs to widespread brain stress, like oxygen deprivation, anoxia, affecting vulnerable networks.
And specific NDE features have been linked to specific areas or chemicals.
Tentatively, yes. Tunnel vision to the visual cortex, life review to the limbic system, altered feelings to temporal lobes. Neurochemicals like endorphins, serotonin, maybe even endogenous DMT have been hypothesized. More recently, ketamine-like effects from NMDA receptor blockade under stress have gained attention due to the similarity between ketamine states and NDEs.
But these are still mostly hypotheses.
Yes, lacking full empirical proof. The overall neurological picture points towards OBEs involving complex, widespread disruption affecting large brain networks. But the exact foundational processes and the answers to why me, why now, those remain unclear. The review suggests looking at modern psychedelic research might offer new clues here.
Okay, it feels like we've journeyed through a lot. Definitions, triggers, theories, brain correlates. As we wrap up, what are the main takeaways from this deep dive into the established understanding of OBEs?
I think a few key things stand out. First, defining OBEs precisely is harder than it looks and crucial for good research. Second, they pop up in an incredibly wide range of situations, physiological, psychological, drug-induced.
Right.
Third, the major psychological theories offer useful ideas, especially around sensory disruption, but they don't explain everything. And finally, the neurological picture points towards complex, widespread brain network disruption, but the specifics are still being worked out.
And despite all this work, there are still big unanswered questions.
Absolutely. The review notes we still lack large-scale surveys mapping the full range of phenomena people actually experience. And while research focusing on brain and psychology explanations dominates, the question of whether there's any non-material aspect, actual consciousness separation remains debated, though current scientific evidence for it is minimal.
And those three big tasks for future theories remain.
Yes, explaining the diverse triggers, explaining individual differences, why some people not others, and explaining the situational variability, why now, not then. Current theories and neurological findings give clues, but not complete answers.
So given this complexity, the persistence of these experiences across cultures and time, what's a final thought for listeners to mull over?
Maybe consider this. What does the very existence of these varied, compelling OBE reports, regardless of their ultimate explanation, suggest about the nature of our own consciousness? About how we construct our sense of self and our reality? Are they just brain glitches? Or do they hint at something more fluid, more mysterious about the mind-body connection? It certainly makes you think about the boundaries of self and perception.
That's definitely something to ponder. Thank you so much for walking us through this really complex and fascinating area. It's clear there's a lot we know, but still so much more to understand about out-of-body experiences.
It was my pleasure. Hopefully this deep dive provides a solid base for understanding the ongoing research and the questions scientists are still trying to answer in this field. It's worth reflecting on, especially if you've had unusual experiences yourself or just find the nature of consciousness intriguing.
Indeed. And with that provocative thought, we'll conclude this deep dive. We hope you found it enlightening. Until next time.